This episode, we got to see Sam and Bucky where we always kind of suspected they'd end up, in couples therapy.
Yeah,
They air their frustrations with each other, but it's really only Bucky who goes deep. When he talks about how the possibility of Steve being wrong about Sam might mean he was wrong about him too, I really felt for the guy. He wants to come back from the abyss, to make amends and be a better person, but he fears he's just too far gone. Now, Sam's not exactly the most supportive in his reaction, but I think this insight into Bucky's character is key. Will he be able to overcome his self-loathing and accept that he deserves to be alive and free? Or will he stay mired in the past in the belief that Hydra made him irredeemable? Bob, what do you think about this?
You hear many times from Scarlett Johansson's character,
Black Widow.
Natasha. Thank you. I got a lot of red in my ledger. Probably the only other person with more red in their ledger is Bucky. And he has the weight of all of that he's trying to use therapy to get through. Now, Steve, basically was like, look, you're my friend. I've known you my whole life. You are redeemable. And that's hard for Bucky to believe. He's still having nightmares of his past assassinations that he's done.
Of which there were many.
So he's living through that again and again and again. And the only thing he's hanging on to is Steve Rogers telling him, you are redeemable.
Yeah.
So he has to put a lot of faith in Steve Rogers' word. And if he believes Steve Rogers was wrong about Sam, then Steve Rogers isn't infallible. Maybe he's wrong about me too.
And that's got to shake him to his core.
That's got to be terribly heart-wrenching. And just even, how you said Sam wasn't very supportive.
Yeah.
Even Sam, when Bucky drops that penny, there's a beat of just complete silence where even Sam's like, oh.
Yeah.
But then he just goes back into the previous dynamic of, two bickering brothers.
Well, I would say that it's not quite the same dynamic immediately after that of the two bickering brothers, because he does lay out his grievance. I don't think he goes quite as deep with it, but he says it's like, look, like maybe you and Steve won't understand this, but I did what I thought was the right thing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, and if you believe that Steve, if you believe that Steve was right, in trusting Sam to take the shield, then I think you have to at least consider that he would trust that this call from Sam was the right thing as well. I don't know. And I still think that old man Steve is alive, and just, maybe he even saw the news conference and he chose not to get involved. So I think he's basically just checked out, in the sense that he's retired, and he's 100 and some years old now. But I think that, I think that is, we got a peek at like a deeper level of conflict between these two guys that really only arose as a result of Sam handing the shield over, right? Giving up the shield.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you got to wonder how that's going to be resolved. But I think that is in Sam's head now, is that like, this is where Bucky is at mentally and emotionally. And it ain't good.
It's definitely something that's going to marinate, and we're going to see probably over the next couple episodes.
Yeah. And I really wonder how Sam is going to get his hands on that shield again, because we see him with it in the trailer. Like, I wonder if like,
which I have kind of a theory there.
Oh, okay. We'll get into that in our theories.
Yeah.
But like, without getting into like that deep down that rabbit hole, like, just to throw out a couple like options, like, I wonder whether is it going to be a situation where, because I don't think Sam is going to steal it, like take it forcibly from Walker. Is Walker going to hand it over to him in a moment where he shows that he's a better man than we think he is, or where he like kind of has to for PR purposes, like maybe like things come to a head and like, oh, the news cameras are there, and he's like, crap, I gotta like like to look good, like I got to do this, or is it going to be a situation where like he gets taken out of commission and Sam happens to be there and picks it up? You know, like I don't know what's going to happen. So yeah, we'll get into our predictions in a little bit later. But like I you know, it's a question, because I think that, as I said before, it's part of Sam's journey in this show to realize that he does deserve it, you know, and that he needs to trust Steve's trust in him, basically, if that makes any sense at all.
Right.
But so I thought it was funny though, the beginning of the couples therapy session where, you know, where they were kind of bickering and they had to like get real close, and it was like, I love how she it was funny because she said, she was like, well, sometimes when I do couples therapy I do this, and they like, their reaction was just like, you know, like, because they're definitely you know, these guys did not grow up like being taught to overshare their feelings.
Yeah, they're the stereotypical hold it all in guy.
Yeah. And I'm not saying they're like toxically masculine, if you like want to like get into that terminology. Like, I'm not saying anything like that. Like, maybe Bucky is like holding on to some like, you know, more like old-fashioned like emotional suppression.
Well, I mean, if anybody's going to be old-fashioned, it's going to be Bucky.
Right. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being old-fashioned. I'm just saying like that combined with all of this stuff that he's trying to deal with from when he was brainwashed is like, he is holding it in too much, you know. He is holding it in too much, and that's why he's in therapy, and that's probably a good thing for him. But they really resisted getting into it, but I did find it funny how, you know, she's like, she asked, what did she ask him? She was like, if you could wake up and a miracle would have happened, can you describe what that would be? And they're like rolling their eyes like, oh boy, like, and
they're both like, the other one could shut up.
Yeah, basically. So then, you know, then they have to look into each other's eyes, and it was interesting. You know, that was an interesting exercise because you know, it took them a minute to actually get to the point where they were looking directly into each other's eyes.
Yeah, and even then, she's like, "Hey, are you two having a staring contest? Knock it off! Blink."
That's right. Yeah, she's like, "For God's sake, somebody blink." So, you know, that was that bickering, you know, brother kind of dynamic that I think...
who's going to flinch first?
Yeah. Right, exactly. But I mean, I think Bucky flinched first because he really went deep and he really spoke what had been on his mind. And that was probably the first time he articulated that even to himself, I'm guessing.
Yeah, well, Bucky has had the advantage in this department of, this is not by any stretch of the imagination his first therapy session. So
True.
So he, over several sessions of therapy, now the therapist might have just dragged it out of him kicking and screaming, but he has learned to open up a little bit about his feelings.
Yeah.
Sam has not.
Yeah, she's kind of greased the rails for Bucky a little bit.
Yeah.
To get him to this point. But yeah, I'm glad that like they didn't futz around with like, you know, him avoiding, I don't know, talking about his feelings and like, you know, there's only 6 episodes. Like, how many therapy sessions can he attend in this show before things come to a head? So I really like that. This is part of what I was saying with like, I don't think the show is like messing around with, you know, side stories and what people would call filler. And like, I don't think WandaVision really did that either, even though some people, you know, thought that it did, or, you know, to them, in their opinion, it did. But yeah, I really enjoyed the couples therapy thing because it was funny, but it got emotionally real. And that's, I think, something that Marvel does really well, is it balances the humor with, like, you know, the emotional realism, as I would call it. So anything else you want to say about the couples therapy session?
No, it was just a really fun scene. It was probably my favorite scene of the whole episode.
Oh, it was? That was your favorite scene for the whole episode? Okay, interesting. I did enjoy it. Actually, come to think of it, I think it was the most impactful emotional scene in the episode. I really do. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic.